It's July the 9th, 2020, and welcome to the Water Action Platform. This is the 14th webinar we've held since the pandemic began. This is the platform where you, the global water sector, can share your experiences or ask questions, COVID-19 related or otherwise, that others around the world might be able to answer. This week, alongside the usual updates, our sector expert interview is with a man who's been researching whether COVID-19 is seasonal or not, and can therefore tell us whether we can expect a second spike. And our technology showcase is with a firm who can provide a robust, cost-effective method of measuring the virus. I will also share with you news of a virtual yet international innovation festival and tell you how you can get involved. As always, I will only share short highlights here, but the slides will be circulated later today and you'll have all the links and reference documents. You can, of course, also get them from the new Water Action Platform website. Now, this platform is dedicated to collaboration and knowledge sharing within the water sector. It's open to all and free at the point of use. It is kindly supported by our sponsors. I thank them all. Last week's webinar has been viewed a great many times, literally hundreds. Thank you for your feedback. We've taken it on board. You can now log in via your LinkedIn account if that's easier for you. Now, as it happens, I'm on holiday this week, and in a test of how much my wife loves me, we brought this whole recording studio with us with the intention of delivering this webinar live. Unfortunately, when we were doing the tests yesterday on the upload speeds, we found that there was insufficient support to run a live feed. So this has been pre-recorded. I will, however, be online to answer any questions that you post in the chat. And next time, God willing, it will be live, I promise. Now, alongside the COVID-19 related WhatsApp groups, we also have some knowledge forums looking at issues that are not COVID-19 related. For example, we have an asset management group and we're doing a survey, you can see the table here, within this group that is identifying the hot asset management topics. You can join this or any of the other knowledge forums via our website. On the next webinar, alongside the usual COVID-19 related updates, I will start including highlights from these non-COVID-19 forums, and I hope that that will bring an interesting new angle to these sessions. Now, without further ado, let's get straight into it. We start, as always, with the updates from the various WhatsApp chat forums. Now, our opening infographic here shows how cumulative cases continue to rise in Latin America. It dispels any myth that people might have that the virus is passing. In Latin America, the situation is quite simply dire. We also have multiple resurgences occurring in countries which had appeared to control their outbreak. We are still a long way from the end of this pandemic and we need to remain diligent and focused. And with that in mind, this infographic ranks the risks associated with various day-to-day activities. Note how some of the activities that governments appear to be encouraging as we come out of lockdown, such as going to amusement parks or going to bars, actually rate as a much higher risk than some of the currently banned activities, such as going for a swim. Now, the key to all of this, of course, is how we manage the transmission risk. And this question of transmission risk and whether the transmission through sewage is something we should worry about has come up regularly in these webinars. And this week is no exception. The paper noted here summarises the evidence for a fecal-oral transmission of SARS-CoV-2, in particular in relation to recreational waters. It cites 3 recent papers which have documented the isolation of live virus, but notes that the viability of that virus is unknown. Now, that's the key fact not to be overlooked. More research is needed, but for the moment we hold to our previously stated conclusions, namely that the risk of the virus spreading through sewage is very low. Now, staying with transmission risk, but looking now at the office and public spaces, this paper highlights a singularly specific issue with COVID-19. It notes that respiratory diseases are spread by droplets and aerosols. But note the size difference. Droplets are greater than 5 microns, aerosols are smaller. Now, the traditional way that we deal with colds and influenzas is based on control measures that are focused on droplets, not the smaller sizes. And this is why we need specific high-quality masks to address COVID-19. This paper goes on to note that the aerosols that are often produced by asymptomatic individuals and that they can accumulate in buildings. They note the rather depressing conclusion that the recommendation to stay 2 meters apart might actually not be enough under many indoor conditions where aerosols can remain airborne for hours and can accumulate over time. Now, if that wasn't enough to worry about, over the past week there's also been a fair bit of press asking the question, when did the virus leave China? In particular, it appears that the virus was present in Italy much earlier than we previously thought. The first local case was noted on the 21st of February. But these researchers, La Rosa et al., looked at 40 historic samples from various cities across northern Italy. Of those 40 sewage samples, a significant number, 15 of them, had inactive RNA from the SARS-CoV-2 present in them, with some of them dating back to mid-December, i.e. 2 months earlier than we'd previously thought. Well, what does this tell us? Well, two things. First, it tells us that the virus was circulating in different regions, in different cities, much earlier than we previously thought. Therefore, our previous understanding of how that virus is spread has clearly been quite simply wrong. Secondly, it highlights the importance and potential huge value of using sewer monitoring as an early warning system. Now, in a further interesting twist, this paper by Stadelbauer et al. Found similar evidence for an earlier than expected appearance of the virus in the USA, in particular in New York. The first local New York case was diagnosed in March, yet this data shows that it was probably present a month earlier. Now, that timing, as we all know, is incredibly important. How we manage the exposure during those crucial initial weeks is what makes or breaks a COVID-19 outbreak. Now, as some of you will have noted, there has been some chatter in the press in recent weeks over a potentially even more deadly virus that could be coming our way. At Isle, we thought it would be helpful to try and address the story here and to try and sort some of the facts from the nonsense. So first, the facts. Well, there has indeed been evidence of a swine flu virus called G4. G4 is similar to the H1N1 virus, and so it is potentially very dangerous. And furthermore, G4 has been found in people working in pig farms. That fact shows that it can jump from pigs to humans. However, and this is the important bit, there is no evidence that G4 has passed from human to human despite 5 years of extensive exposure. So it probably isn't going to cause a pandemic anytime soon. Now, while we're on the subject of debunking false news, there have recently been reports that COVID-19 was detected in Spanish wastewater samples dating back to March 2019, long before, 12 months before it first appeared in Wuhan, or 8 months before. Our advice is to treat these reports with healthy skepticism. Researchers have indeed detected the presence of the virus in these very old samples, and these researchers aren't some sort of backstreet researchers. They're a very respected team that are involved in the Sentinel surveillance project. However, these same researchers have revealed that while the March 2019 samples tested positive, with low levels of SARS-CoV-2, later samples from May tested negative. Despite what is reported in some parts of the press, the authors have not actually drawn the conclusion that the virus was present in Spain in March 2019. The sample numbers are too low to make that sort of claim. The most likely explanation is that the samples have been contaminated, but let's wait until we have some proven science before getting too excited about these sorts of media reports. Now, you may remember this slide from the last webinar. Sandra Cook from the Canadian Water Network had asked for information on the costs associated with setting up a wastewater epidemiological surveillance system. The question proved very popular with a number of you, and we had requests for similar information. I presented 2 responses. First one here from Jenny Lawlier in Qatar, which outlined how you might work with local laboratories. Secondly, there was this comment from Jo Burgess in South Africa, and she highlighted the possible economic and practical benefits of measuring using a surrogate MHV virus rather than the SARS-CoV-2 one directly. Now, neither of those responses, good though they were, addressed the key part of the question, which was how much might a epidemiological surveillance system cost? This week, we have some updates which help address that question specifically. First, we have this paper from Shuttleworth et al., which looks at the tasks and costs required when designing a wastewater-based early warning system. This paper is a collaboration between Arup, KWR and Exeter University, and a bit like the TasWater board paper that we shared a few months ago, it's only available upon request. So please, if you want to see it, drop an email to either myself or Megan. This paper argues that by monitoring the RNA in sewage and combining this data with the information about demography and healthcare and things like that, we can identify the high-risk areas and we can model how the disease might spread in response to various interventions. The paper makes recommendations about the ideal delivery team and identifies the 6 key steps which need to be undertaken. However, I suspect it's the costs which are of most interest to this particular audience. So the precise costs will vary depending on the size of area being tested, when some costs are fixed, like the modelling costs, and some costs will be variable, sample costs and transport of samples to labs. The paper identifies that there are 2 main cost elements: an initiation phase, during which the systems are set up, and a deployment phase. In the initiation phase, the costs are around £200,000 sterling, and the deployment costs for a 30 treatment site configuration, which they estimate would serve a 3 to 5 million population, is around £750,000 to £1 million sterling. This slide shows the table for the cost for the initiation phase, and this slide shows the one for the deployment. And as these 2 tables show, some of these costs are optional, the numbers in red, and clearly there will be local variances. However, this paper is an incredibly useful indicator of the likely costs of a sewer-based early warning system. Now, in addition to the data from that paper, I'm delighted to also share with you the results from GoAigua and their experiences in Valencia in Spain. Now, we've mentioned this trial before on previous webinars, and you might recall GoAigua is a spin-out company from Global Omnium, and they'd been monitoring for viruses in the sewers back since 2018. So when the COVID-19 pandemic began, they simply adapted their processes and were able to launch very quickly an at-scale sewer monitoring system. As with the previous example, they've also been able to identify that the virus is present 10 days before infections appear. And they've looked at similar scale of testing, i.e. about 20 cities serving 3 to 4 million people. GoAigua are currently sampling across 360 locations and gathering over 1,000 samples a week. So it's a big trial. The GoAigua pricing model is very similar, with an initial setup phase and then a delivery phase. The initial phase is quite short and attracts a relatively minor consulting fee. The delivery phase will vary from client to client and includes, as a minimum, the integration of a utility's GIS and topography data into the GoAigua network. The fee here is quoted as typically being in the tens of thousands. Now, the main cost, which the utility has some degree of control over, is the sampling costs. And those, based on past experiences, those costs range per sample between $30 and $50. Now, if you want to know any more about the GoAigua system, please contact Pablo Calabuig directly. We do also have a recorded interview with him, which is available on the Water Action Platform website if you want to learn a little bit more. So with all of this news going on, it begs the question of, is there any good news? Well, yes, there is. We've got 4 pieces of good news we'd like to share with you. And let's start with the AfriAlliance and their Needs and Solutions Hub. AfriAlliance is a project which aims to better prepare Africa for future climate change challenges. It does this by having African and European stakeholders work together in the areas of water innovation, research, policy and capacity development. They've recently compiled the water-related needs of African stakeholders and matched them with solutions. And this initiative actually isn't specific to COVID-19, but many of the needs and solutions are aligned at addressing the COVID-19 challenges. I highlight it here because it's one of the most intuitive and informative platforms that we have ever seen. The second bit of good news has to be the hashtag #OurWaterWorkers social media campaign, which we highlighted last week. This initiative was started by GWI as a means to encourage and celebrate some of the frontline heroes within the water sector and everything that they've done to keep the taps flowing and the toilets flushing. A great many organisations embrace the opportunity to praise their staff, which is something to feel good about. There is even talk now of making the 25th of June the International Day for recognising water workers. My third piece of good news relates to an exciting development in the potential method of killing airborne viruses using UV. Now, in the water sector in particular, we're familiar with the germicidal properties of UV light. It's used widely for disinfection. Most of us are acutely aware of the harmful impact germicidal UV, i.e. UV at 254 nanometers, could have on human skin. By contrast, UV light in the 207 to 222 nanometer range, which is often called far UVC light, can kill pathogens but not humans. Research in the past has shown its ability to kill airborne influenza viruses, and recent studies have shown that this far UVC light can also act against some coronaviruses. In particular, they've tested it against alpha H COVID 229E and beta H COVID OC43. What does that actually mean for COVID-19? Well, since all human coronaviruses are genomically similar, it should have the same effect. Basically, the conclusion is that at these sort of low dose rates, far UVC exposure might well provide a method for reducing the level of virus in public locations. On its own, this doesn't solve the pandemic, but it's definitely part of the solution. The final bit of good news comes from this inspiring document produced by the IADB. It highlights how the scientific innovation and business communities are working together. The current pandemic has created a new environment of collaboration and joint working which deserves celebrating. Now, this is despite the fact that life is exceptionally tough. I know you can't see the detail on this table. You will when you access the full slide deck, but basically it confirms what we all suspected, namely that most companies have seen a massive decline in their sales. 86% of businesses in Brazil have seen their sales drop significantly. The phrase has been overused, but we really are in unprecedented times. And this is why the collaboration across sectors is so incredible. Whether it's scientists collaborating to develop vaccines and antivirals, or manufacturers repurposing their factories to produce healthcare supplies, or startup companies developing new solutions, everyone is doing their part. And that's something to celebrate. So now we come to this week's sector expert. You might recall on the previous webinar, I reported some recent research which had indicated that the COVID-19 virus was probably seasonal. We've been in contact with one of the researchers of that paper, Fernando Miralles-Wilhelm, based at the University of Maryland, and we contacted him to learn a bit more about the work he'd been doing and the potential implications. My colleague Victor Arroyo interviewed Fernando, and the link to the full interview will be shared with the slide deck later. What we've done for this particular summary webinar is edit out a short 3-minute highlight from that interview. By way of introduction, I should say that Fernando is a waterman, not a virus man, i.e. he's one of us. He's a trained hydrologist, and he spent decades researching groundwater, wetlands and surface water science. His involvement in this particular research paper began when he was approached by colleagues at the University of Maryland who were trying to work out why the virus in Wuhan had not travelled south. They wanted to understand why it wasn't spreading as they might have expected. And to do that, they needed to move quickly, and Fernando was part of the team that was mobilised. So here, he picks up the story following that Friday afternoon conversation that he had with his colleagues.
And what we did over that weekend, so we worked on Saturday and Sunday to try to gather information of other locations around the world where there were starting to be cases reported, not big outbreaks, but reported cases of the coronavirus. And what we found is that the majority of cases still fell in that band of latitude. So this told us there was something happening there. Yeah. Something that had to do with the virus itself and with the physics of how it moved. So then we started from March onwards. We started to look at every outbreak around the world. What was the first case reported, how it grew, and what was the temperature change during that period. And what we found is that for about 50 cities around the world, including cities in the Southern Hemisphere, and I'll get back to that in a second, there was a sweet spot for virus outbreak. An outbreak means basically when the cases start to grow, okay? At the very, very beginning. So this is not really about the human-to-human transmission, which is still the biggest. So the biggest way to get coronavirus is human-to-human. But the actual conditions that need to exist for the virus to explode do have to have some environmental variables. So we looked at temperature. We and the sweet spot was between 5 degrees Celsius and 11 degrees Celsius. And then we also looked at humidity, because the dryness and other viruses have some correlations with humidity. And me being a hydrologist, that's a little bit more of what I do. We also found relative humidities of between 40 and 70%. So not too humid, not too dry, but like in the middle. And we saw that of the 50 cities, a good percentage of them fell in that range. One of the more valuable ways to use this information is in predictive modeling. So these epidemiological models that predict outbreaks and predict the so the models that are used to date, no one had ever modified these models to include temperature and humidity.
That means that we can expect a reborn of the virus in our latitudes in autumn or November, December.
It could, yeah. So it could.
Because,
so it could, and we do expect a resurgence of the virus because everything points to the fact that this is going to be a seasonal virus. So it's going to come and go, like influenza, for example, which is the one that's probably closest to it. And I think that because we have very good ways to predict weather and climate to some degree, we should, we're already telling people that, come November, come early December in the Northern Hemisphere, you should see a resurgence. If you're prepared, if you take the social measures that are needed, you can actually minimize the impact. And that's an important finding, because up until maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, we were thinking that this would just go away, right? It's not going to go away. It's going to come back. We need to be ready. But we can be ready, and we have plenty of warning. There's no excuse for not being ready now for something going to happen in November, right?
What a great update. I love hearing researchers enthuse about what they do. If you listen to the whole interview, you will hear him talk about using satellites to help with predictions and a variety of other topics. However, I'm sure you heard loud and clear that key takeaway at the end. This is almost certainly a seasonal virus. We can expect it to return. We need to be ready for it, and with insights like this, we can be. So now we come to this week's technology showcase. This week, it's LuminUltra Inc., based out of Canada. LuminUltra was founded in 1995 and over the past few decades has grown to become one of the world's leading companies in the field of molecular biological testing. One of their main product lines is called GeneCount, and this focuses on the measurement of nucleic acids. The measurement of DNA and RNA through technologies like this can determine the presence and quantity of specific biological materials, ranging from animal, vegetable and bacterial cells, including viruses. Now, I met with LuminUltra's CEO, Pat Whalen, earlier this week and asked him how the last 3 months had gone.
It's been an interesting time. It all kind of started in the middle of March when our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, issued a call to action for industry across Canada to participate in the fight against COVID-19, and specifically was asking at the time for assistance in manufacturing things like personal protective equipment and ventilators, and also diagnostic testing. And when we heard that, we got in contact with people in the federal government, specifically the Public Health Agency of Canada, and we very quickly realized that we could help in a very significant way in shoring up the supply chain for these reagents that are needed to carry out COVID-19 tests across the country.
They can't have believed their luck. They put out this call for tender and one of their own local companies comes up. It's just incredible. Sorry, I interrupted. Carry on.
No, and you're absolutely right. And they didn't know to ask us because they didn't know that we existed.
During the past 3 months, LuminUltra has mobilised their resources and delivered a staggering 5 million qPCR test equivalents to the Canadian government. They are now beginning to support other countries in a similar way. Perhaps not surprisingly, a key part of our discussion explored how they could support the monitoring of SARS-CoV-2 in sewage. I learned that this sort of monitoring is not new. LuminUltra have been able to monitor the use of recreational drugs through the concentration of excreted derivatives in sewage. LuminUltra has clearly evolved from clinical testing to environmental testing. And here's Pat again.
The simple fact of the matter is that the virus transmits from person to person through other vectors, through the air, through surfaces. And the science is still evolving. There's still a lot of literature that's being developed. But what we know is that people can not only infect another person through direct contact, but also through vectors of air and surfaces. But the really interesting one that we'll talk more about here today is the potential for wastewater to act as that early warning system that you mentioned, Pierce, of being able to determine the presence of asymptomatic carriers without actually having to run tests directly on people.
Pat made the vital point that we, the water sector, have to answer some key questions if the use of sewage monitoring as an early warning system is to be fully exploited. Not least, this includes resolving practical issues such as how frequently we should test and where we should test. Do we do it on site or via a mail-in system? Is it just the SARS-CoV-2 that we need to be testing for, or is there a wider suite? And of course, there's the question of who funds this. One of the things we didn't discuss in the interview, but I subsequently asked Pat afterwards, was around pricing. How much would it cost a utility to get these sorts of samples processed? Well, the answer will clearly vary on the number of units purchased, but the ballpark figure for a single instrument which can analyse SARS-CoV-2, E. coli, Legionella, basically any virus or bacteria that you care to name, will set you back by about $15,000, with the individual analysis cost being around $30. Now, it's not for me to sell their kit for them, but if you're doing these tests at scale, this feels like a pretty attractive option. If you listen to the full interview, by following the link here in the slides, you will also hear Pat talk about the work that they're doing to determine the true food mass ratio in activated sludge plants via ATP measurements, and the work they're doing with TOC measurements in collaboration with Suez Analytical Instruments. These are almost as exciting as the SARS-CoV-2 activities, as they could have a significant impact on the energy costs associated with wastewater treatment. Knowing that this will probably strike a chord with many of you, I made Pat promise to come back and share the full data in a few months' time. After all, we will one day, hopefully soon, return to a world where this sort of longer-term, more strategic issue will dominate our thinking once more. Thank you, Pat, for taking the time to speak to me. And finally, we come to a lovely story about the Northumbrian Water Innovation Festival. I share it here because there is a terrific opportunity for you personally to get involved if the following strikes a chord. For those of you who don't know them, Northumbrian Water is a water utility based in the northeast of the UK. They provide water and sewage services to over 4 million people. For the last few years, every summer, they've held an innovation festival. You can think of it as a sort of Woodstock or Glastonbury for the water sector. As you can see here, it has a proper British summer festival feel to it. Since it started in 2017, it's grown year on year with 6,000 people from 1,500 organisations attending the event last year. The aim is to develop new ideas and innovations which will better serve customers, and last year the festival produced over 130 projects. A particular feature of the festival are things called sprints. Now, these are designed to fast-track solutions and focus on specific issues and opportunities. The sprints typically run over the full 4-day period of the festival, often starting on day 1 with the scoping out of a problem and then working through possible solutions so that by day 4 there's an output or a solution or at least a clear way forward. This year, perhaps not surprisingly, the festival is going digital. The theme is Build Back Better, which is particularly relevant in a post-COVID world. The downside of this digital approach is it means that if you want the full experience of a British summer festival, well, you need to provide your own mud and rain. However, the upside is that a much wider group of people can get involved from anywhere around the world. In what some might describe as a glorious display of ambition and others might call it stupidity, Isle is taking the lead on an international 4-day, 24-hour sprint as part of this festival. And we're going to look at how we can improve workplace diversity in the water sector. If this is a topic that resonates with you or your organisation or any colleagues that you've got, I wholeheartedly invite you to join us for this exciting initiative. Your involvement would actually require nothing more than 2 45-minute Zoom calls on each of the 4 days of the festival. What we're going to do is over the 4 days, we'll highlight the key issues, gather data, identify ways to improve, and ultimately provide hopefully practical insights and share best practice. It promises to be a really engaging, very relevant and very informative few days, in particular in the light of the recent Black Lives Matter activities. The way we're going to do it is the sprints will basically circle around the globe. We'll start in Asia Pacific, and then on the second Zoom call of the Asia Pacific day, we'll pass to Europe, who will obviously be having their first call of the day. Europe will then pass to America, and they will then pass back to Asia Pacific. And by working in that fashion, we're going to create this truly collaborative, truly international initiative, which I trust will deliver real pertinent value to all of the organisations involved. You can join this festival from your own desk. There's no requirement to travel. And all you need is an open mind and an open heart for this important topic. If you're interested in knowing more, please add a comment into the chat box here or send me an email and I can provide you with more details. With that, I bring this week's webinar to a close. I thank again our sponsors for their kind and continued support. Please share any feedback or suggestions for future sector experts, case studies or technology showcases. Finally, the next webinar will be in 2 weeks' time on July the 23rd. Megan's going to circulate calendar invites shortly. I thank you for your time. Don't forget to let me know if you want to be part of the Northumbrian Innovation Festival or to add your votes to the asset management survey that I mentioned at the beginning. Keep asking questions, keep sharing, and keep safe.